So, the reign of terror is over. Robespierre has had a rather sharp meeting with his own invention, and Paris is collectively breeding out for the first time in years. The national pastime is no longer seeing who can get denounced the fastest. France was exhausted. They'd killed a king, killed the revolutionaries who killed the king, and then killed the revolutionaries who killed those revolutionaries. They were left with a very tricky question. How do you build a government when you're terrified of a king on one side and a bloodthirsty dictator on the other? Their answer was a masterpiece of overthinking. A 5-man executive committee called the Directory. Because if one person in charge is scary, 5 people in charge will surely be responsible and efficient. A flawless theory. The Constitution of the Year 3 was a document written by people with severe political trauma. To prevent another dictatorship, they split the legislature into 2 houses. You had the Council of 500, a big room of guys whose only job was to come up with ideas for laws. Think of them as the National Suggestion Box. Then you had the Council of Ancients, 250 men who had to be over 40 and married or widowed because apparently that's the demographic for peak wisdom. Their job was simply to say yes or no to the suggestions. They couldn't amend anything. It was a binary choice. And to ensure maximum instability, 1/3 of the legislature and 1 of the 5 directors were replaced every single year. They didn't just build a government with checks and balances, they built a government that was designed to trip over its own feet, constantly. So, who were these 5 men tasked with leading France out of chaos? Well, the star of the show was Paul Barras. A former nobleman who voted to execute the king, he was the ultimate political survivor. His primary ideology was whatever kept Paul Barras wealthy and in power. He was notoriously corrupt, throwing decadent parties while the rest of Paris was still figuring out where to get bread. Then you had Lazare Carnot, the organizer of victory, a genuine workaholic and military genius who actually tried to make things work. The problem is that for every competent Carnot, you had guys who were either ideologically rigid, completely forgettable, or just there for the paycheck. It wasn't a cabinet. It was a dysfunctional group project where one person does all the work, one person steals the credit, and the other 3 are just happy to be there. The Directory inherited a country that was completely spectacularly broke. The revolutionary paper money, the assignat, had been printed into oblivion. Its value was so low that people were literally using it as wallpaper. We're talking hyperinflation on a scale that makes your grocery bill look stable. The Directory's brilliant solution? They introduced a new kind of paper money, the Mandak Territorial. This new currency failed even more quickly than the old one, collapsing in less than a year. A truly impressive achievement in financial mismanagement. Having failed twice with paper, they announced a return to metal currency, which was great, except they didn't have any. The government was basically running on IOUs and whatever they could shake down from newly conquered territories. Their economic policy was hope, but without the optimism. Stability was not the Directory's strong suit. It was constantly under attack from literally everyone. On the right, you had the royalists, who missed the good old days of having a king and were secretly plotting a comeback. They were surprisingly well organized, operating through groups like the Clichy Club in Paris. On the far left, you had the proto-communists. Gracchus Babeuf and his conspiracy of the equals wanted to abolish private property and create total equality. A noble idea, perhaps, but their plan was discovered, and Babeuf ended up meeting that famous French doctor, Guillotine. The Directory spent most of its energy just surviving, pinballing between putting down a royalist plot one month and the Jacobin uprising the next. Governing was an afterthought. In 1797, the unthinkable happened. The Directory held elections, and the French people, tired of chaos and corruption, voted for monarchists. A huge number of royalists won seats in the councils. It looked like the Republic was about to vote itself out of existence and bring back a king. So what did the directors do? Did they accept the will of the people? Did they form a coalition? Of course not. 3 of the directors, led by Barras, organized a coup against their own government. It's called the Coup of 18 Fructidor. They called in the army, specifically a general sent by Napoleon Bonaparte, to purge the new deputies. They arrested dozens of their political opponents, canceled the election results in 49 departments, and deported the losers to French Guiana, which was basically a death sentence. And that was the day the French Directory officially decided democracy was a lovely idea as long as they always won. How did this bankrupt government afford an army big enough to stage coups against itself? Simple. War paid for itself. The Directory's foreign policy wasn't about spreading revolutionary ideals. It was a protection racket on a continental scale. The best example is Napoleon Bonaparte's campaign in Italy. He wasn't just defeating Austrians, he was systematically looting the Italian city-states. Convoys of gold, silver, and priceless works of art, like the horses of St. Mark from Venice, were shipped back to Paris to fill the empty treasury. They also set up sister republics in places like Holland, Switzerland, and Italy. These weren't independent allies, they were puppet states forced to pay for their own French military occupation. It was colonialism disguised as liberation. A truly modern concept. By 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte was a problem. He was incredibly popular, shockingly ambitious, and stationed with his army just a short march from Paris. For the nervous directors, this was a terrifying combination. So they came up with a genius plan. Give him an army and send him as far away as humanly possible. Napoleon, they said, how would you like to go invade Egypt to disrupt British trade routes to India? It was a terrible strategic idea, but it got him out of their hair. While Napoleon was off discovering the Rosetta Stone and fighting Mamluks in the shadow of the pyramids, things back in Europe went sideways. A new alliance, the Second Coalition, formed against France and promptly began kicking the French out of Italy, undoing all of Napoleon's hard work. The directors had successfully exiled their best general right when they needed him most. Peak strategy. By late 1799, the Directory was a joke. The economy was a mess, the war was going badly, and the government had zero public support. One of the directors himself, a man named Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès, decided the system needed to be torn down. He famously said he was looking for a sword, a popular general to provide the muscle for a coup that would install a more stable, authoritarian regime. Just then, Napoleon conveniently abandoned his army in Egypt and reappeared in France to thunderous applause. Sieyès thought he'd found his puppet. The coup was set for 18 Brumaire. It was almost a farce. Napoleon tried to address the Council of 500 and completely botched it, getting shouted down and practically fainting. His brother, Lucien Bonaparte, had to save the day by running outside and telling the soldiers that the politicians were trying to assassinate their general. The guards stormed the chamber, the deputies fled, and just like that, the Directory was over. It didn't die with a bang, but with a pathetic, stage-managed whimper. So, what's the grand takeaway from the Directory? It was the chaotic, corrupt, and deeply incompetent bridge between the bloody idealism of the Terror and the military dictatorship of Napoleon. It was a government born from fear, designed for gridlock, and run by self-interested survivors. For 5 years, it gave France a taste of a republic run by committees, lawyers, and schemers. And that taste was so bitter, so disappointing, that when a 30-year-old general promised order, glory, and stability in exchange for a few democratic niceties, the entire country basically said, "Yes, please." The Directory's greatest legacy is that it was so bad, it made Napoleon Bonaparte look like a reasonable alternative. It's a timeless lesson in how the desperate search for a moderate solution can sometimes just pave the way for a man on a horse. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!